Hello, and thanks for tuning in to this short lecture on genre in the context of the film noir. Captions can be turned on at the bottom right-hand side of the screen. Even if you do not feel you need them, they might be helpful to you by way of getting the proper spellings of names and titles. If this is your first time checking out my channel, this particular lecture is part of an online film noir class I am giving, and for this video, we'll be breaking down the narrative components as well as looking at the editorial aesthetics of Phantom Lady, an often forgotten wartime film directed by Robert Siodmak. While the spoilers in my lectures are generally light, it is your option to stop now and watch the movie first. We will begin today's lesson with an examination of a term you've probably already learned in an English class, or in your introductory film classes, and that term is genre. What exactly is a genre? As you may have guessed, genres are simply another way of saying categories. We can go with the simple translation like that, or perhaps you might want a more robust definition, such as this: a category of artistic composition characterized by similarities in its form, style, and subject matter. In this definition, it's the last part of this sentence that is probably the most important. You might be asking yourself, well, what exactly is meant by form, style, and subject matter? The genre question might evolve into one of genre aesthetics, the nature and beauty and overall philosophy of an art. But what is nature? And what is beauty? Seems to me that the more we try to define genre, the further we get from real meaning. So we are forced to dive right in. Definitions don't work, so we must engage with a representative example, go with what we might already know about the subject, and ask ourselves what is represented, how it is so represented, and from there we can surmise as to why this representation exists. Here are some ideas I want you to ponder to get our conversation started. Number 1, genre conventions are self-evident within a given culture. You probably already know most of the genre conventions that come from movies. Since films are visual and you belong to the culture from which these movies come, seeing and recognizing is almost instantaneous. For example, if I were to show you this image, ideas of genre creep into the mind even without instructor prompt. Perhaps you are a voracious reader of stories set in outer space. Maybe you have a family member who is a big fan of this genre. Whatever the case may be, this image is easily identifiable as a representative image from the world of science fiction. What about this image? Maybe something about the character's attire or setting strikes you in a familiar way. Even if you might not engage with this sort of narrative every day, you can easily identify this image as coming from the world of the Western. Number 2. Genre is a categorization tool. It helps us decide what to buy and watch, and helps filmmakers choose icons and techniques with which they'll tell their story. Think of it as slang or shorthand for the writer and the viewer. What this means is that categories and aesthetics are really meaningless without also looking at the people and culture who create such categories. Studio executives and storytellers did not decide to create the film noir out of thin air. Film noir was a label used to identify films that had already been created that seemingly dealt with our collective fear of post-war trauma, gang violence, corrupt figures of authority, and perhaps most significantly, traditional gender roles. As the authors Richard Barsam and Dave Monahan would put it, it gives narrative voice to something that is essential. As our world evolves, so too do genre films evolve to satisfy audience taste. We know that the existence of genre is itself an indicator of sophistication, and it suggests that it comes from a culture where people tell stories the same way over and over again, at least societies that are used to hearing stories told a certain way. We can't avoid forming expectations from repeated experiences, and it is through repetitions that we'll see patterns, and through these patterns we will arrive back at definition. And once we know what that thing is, once we've defined it, once we've cornered that thing that we've set out to study, we will be well equipped to detect deviations and departures from those expectations that this class will have set up. Studying these genre films over a span of time, we will be able to sense and perhaps measure this push and pull of the culture's need for sameness and the individual artist's need for variety. So we're going to watch a series of films in this class that are at the same time different as they are the same. They will be exciting, fresh, and new, yet you'll know exactly what's coming. Genre has an uncanny ability of turning up surprises despite its predictability. What sorts of genres can you think of that have predictable patterns? Number 3. By now you may have noticed or realized that genres are not all created equal. What I mean is, not all genres can be directly compared or have the same constituent parts. For the sake of ease, let's just say for now that there are 2 types of genres that will govern our conversation regarding movies then. These 2 types are what I call iconic and thematic. Some genres, like noir, western, and horror, have a strong visual component. We call these iconic genres, wherein a simple image could represent a wide range of moods and ideas. Some genres, like comedies and dramas, are more thematic than iconic, focusing more on non-visual elements of storytelling, like dialogue. In short, iconic genres have an iconic look to them, and that look is generally associated with a predictable set of story patterns and moods. Thematic genres, by contrast, do not possess an iconic and uniform appearance and have more malleable story patterns and a bigger variety of moods. My primary argument for this lecture is to submit that despite noir film's reputation of being needlessly violent and unfavorable in its depiction of women, many examples from the genre functioned and continue to function significantly as a text encouraging of women and focused on the plight of women and women's social issues right around the time of World War II. And of course, they addressed men's issues in post-war American society as well. Film noir, in fact, has still endured as a relevant genre despite changing times. While proto-feminism and proto-feminist have come to sort of mean feminism before its time, as in the 60s, it is important to note that feminist ideas, or what we would consider feminist ideas, have been recorded throughout history for hundreds of years. So if a medieval fairy tale, or a film from the 30s or 40s, champions women's issues and focuses on the anxiety of being a woman in a modern world, it is then popular in academics to refer to this as proto-feminism. While this film does not deal with gender politics in an explicit way, we can see that Ella Raines plays a very resourceful, committed, and headstrong character who seems in many scenes to be wearing men's clothing. When Alan Curtis's Scott Henderson character is being held in jail, Raines' Carol Richmond formidably occupies the narrative space that the male hero typically occupies. She is seen commanding the room and smoking a cigarette in a male posture in the office. She takes matters into her own hands, takes on the role of the male detective, and successfully wrests herself from the clutches of a sexual predator all on her own. One could say that this is an example of a proto-feminist statement. So anyway, going back to Robert Siodmak, how did a director who had begun his career directing non-English language film come to create some of the most compelling pieces of a genre which became known as a primarily American invention? One rationale is that noir is a very, very visual style, and its iconic look, long angular shadows, harsh lighting, and gritty cityscape, communicated a common anxiety felt by many during the years between the mid-30s to the early 50s. Siodmak escaped from Paris on the eve of the Nazi occupation of 1944, and through his associations with filmmaker Billy Wilder, by way of his brother Kurt Siodmak, he was able to easily transition to Hollywood pictures. He was an artist heavily influenced by German Expressionism, a mode of art banned by the Nazis, famous for its politically charged visuals, where representation is often distorted and comprises of long angular lines, highly saturated colors, and/or contrasting lights and darks. This influence gave his first film noir, Phantom Lady, such a bold look. Phantom Lady has also endured the trial of public opinion by its seemingly self-aware depiction of gender and sexual relationships, which one can hypothesize as an indirect byproduct of the film's female producer, Joan Harrison, who was a well-respected producer and former screenwriter for Alfred Hitchcock. Harrison and Siodmak met after he started working for Universal Pictures. Compare the following images. One still from a German Expressionist film, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and this still from one of the penultimate scenes of Phantom Lady. You can easily see that there are common visual elements that academics and writers might say exemplify an expressionist aesthetic. Moving on to the editing. Perhaps what this movie is most famous for is the notorious drumming scene between Elisha Cook Jr. and Ella Raines, in which the former takes our heroine, who is voluntarily undercover as a lady of the night, on a very, very strange date, where Griff and Carol enter the club mid-song. Griff plays a very suggestive drum solo, while Carol eggs him on. This scene has been analyzed many times over by film students and writers alike for its metaphorical allusion to illicit sex. Many noir films of this era were regarded as B pictures, which were lower-budget films scheduled to run on a double bill after the main A picture. Often the B pictures turned a profit more reliably than the A picture due to its lower initial investment. As theorized by film producers, black and white photography and the usage of lesser-known actors made for a whole series of films that would easily make money despite any downturn that the economy might suffer, or any slight shift in future audience taste. As it turns out, noir, while initially considered a disposable genre, ended up enduring as an imprint of a shared, city-dwelling anxiety. Watching the film today, it is historically intriguing to note that these lurid, lower-budget films, with a cool and snazzy look, often gave diverse actors opportunities to appear or to develop characters they wouldn't otherwise get to. As a contemporary viewer, it is interesting to analyze the penultimate scene as an allegory for rape. Jack Marlowe, played by Francho Tone, being an elegant and well-dressed male assailant who kills via a device that is symbolically male, the necktie, might be a statement about the nature of sexual violence in modern society. In fact, the nature of violence perpetuated by people ill-equipped to handle the stress and burden of a post-war America would continue to be a theme still explored today in neo-noir movies, which we will explore later. Siodmak deals with this difficult subject matter and inserts some interesting so-called progressive takes in his film Phantom Lady. While there are some minor story inconsistencies, it does serve as a good place to begin the conversation about how indelible and useful the film noir genre is. As we begin to explore this interesting world of the film noir, think of yourself not as a student, but as an explorer. See yourself as a researcher would. When we look at a particular image, or look at a particular film, what genre of literature or art is being evoked here? Think of this class like you're walking through a museum with your instructor. What questions might you ask yourself as you look at different pieces of representative art? Thanks for watching.